Hey, Robert, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Karina. I appreciate you having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been following you for so long, like years and years. And we actually worked together back in 2013 for the book that came out in 2014. But this is actually the first time we're having like an actual conversation. So I'm super excited that you're here on the show. Thanks again.
Yeah, we do have quite that background. I mean, that's almost, I mean, it's close to 10 years. 2013 is only 8 years ago. So,
Hmm.
yeah, we've been at it for a while, like spreading this message in our own ways and writing books. And happy to collaborate with you and to be involved in your projects. And happy to be on the show today.
Well, that is awesome. Let's jump right in then, shall we? And I know that we have some exciting developments in your world to talk about as well, including a book, which we will get to for sure. But why don't we start at the beginning? So, you are like pretty much the founder of the vegan bodybuilding movement. Like every vegan, even if they're not into fitness, knows who Robert Cheeke is, which is fantastic. And so, you've been vegan for over a quarter of a century and you've been training this whole time, you have managed to gain 100 pounds on a plant based diet throughout or during that time. So, can you tell our listeners a little bit about that journey? Like, I think, were you 15 when you first started, like
Yeah, it
way back
was.
in the day?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we don't have to go into super long, like life story, but we're interested in a little bit of the origin journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Karina, I'll give you that story. I grew up on a farm out in Western Oregon. My parents came from farming backgrounds. In fact, they met in the animal science department at Oregon State University, where my father was a professor there for
Hmm.
30, I don't know, 35 years or so. He's now retired, but he spent decades teaching people how to raise animals for food. And I grew up on a farm raising animals and showing them in the 4-H fair and selling them at the auction, saying goodbye to dairy calves and to chickens and I think rabbits and other animals that I sold at the auction and got some money for that, which as a teenager or younger than that, 10, 12, 13 years old, was exciting and fun. And that's what I knew coming from a farming background. And then my older sister, Tanya, did something kind of radical. She became a vegetarian in the early
Mm.
90s. She must have been only like 10 years old at the time. And then by the mid 90s, she became vegan. And I didn't know really what that was all about. But she was organizing an animal rights week at my high school. And that's when I decided that out of respect for my older sister, I'm going to become vegan for a week, whatever that means. So this was December 8th, 1995, when it started. And I attended this animal rights week. I listened to speakers. I watched videos of factory farming and animal testing. I read literature and I talked to people, had conversations. And it was on that day that I decided, you know what, maybe I'll give this a go for even longer than a week. And now it's been something like 1,300 weeks. In my 26th year doing this thing. But Karina, one of the important parts of this story, though, which really gives me a story at all, really. I mean, it's the only reason I think that I'm even relevant or that I can write books or anything, is that at the time, uh, I barely weighed 120 pounds as a 5-sport athlete. Like I was an athlete. I was in it. I mean, I was a runner, a basketball player, a wrestler. I was in track and field. I played soccer. I played tennis recreationally. I was into it. And before that, I mean, 8th grade, I was only 89 pounds. I mean, I was a small. My sister didn't even weigh 100 pounds. Kind of a small family, but I wanted to be bigger and stronger. That's where the juxtaposition was. Well, I mean, I grew up watching pro wrestling, He-Man, Captain Planet. Now the
Nice.
era that I grew up in. I'm 41
Yeah.
now. I mean, that's what I really wanted for my life, to be honest. I just want to be bigger and stronger. And part of that is we want something we don't have. We want, whether that's travel or we often crave the things we haven't yet been able to experience. And for me, it was being bigger and stronger, especially as an athlete. And so I questioned whether I could do this on a plant-based diet, or plant-based wasn't even the term then, but
Yeah.
as a vegan, could I do this as a vegan? And so that's what I set out to do. And I worked at it, worked at it, worked at it. I failed miserably at first, which is again part of my story as well, making zero progress because I didn't know what to eat. I just knew what I didn't want to eat anymore. And then eventually transitioning from long distance runner to bodybuilder, I kind of figured it out, and I started to put on weight pretty quickly. And to this day, I have put on exactly 100 pounds, from 120 pounds to I was 222.2 on the scale 2 days ago with clothes on. So right about 220 these days.
Wow. That's huge. That's a transformation right there if I ever saw one.
Yeah, partly because, I became vegan before the internet was a household thing,
Mhm.
and it wasn't expected. That's the thing. It was my parents, my family, my teachers, my coaches, teammates. No one expected me to be able to achieve anything, especially achieving muscle building and strength gains. That just
Mhm.
wasn't in the cards. As the internet, became more popular, websites like MySpace came around. You could connect with other vegans out there around the world, and I started to realize that there's other people doing this too. And collectively, a bunch of us, you included, vegan athletes have been out there showing that plants have all the protein you need and that you can build your body on a plant-based diet.
Exactly. So we'll get into that as well because the whole protein discussion. I mean, you can't have Robert Cheeke on a podcast and not talk about protein. But you were mentioning like it was not expected, right? So your teammates, your family members, your classmates, the vegan thing was not expected. But was there pushback? Like, what was the actual response of these folks in your life? Was it negative? Was it positive? Did they just not get it? What was the deal?
Yeah, good question. And at first there was resistance, and that's natural for the mid 90s in an agriculture community and in the family that I was
Good
in.
point. Yeah.
Right. So my parents, my dad being an animal scientist and just, being a scientist and nutrition expert in general, he was concerned. He's a PhD professor, author of 15 textbooks, pretty smart guy, and was worried about my health, and my mom as well. Again, coming from a farming background, they weren't sure that I was going to get all the nutrition that I needed with plants.
Hmm.
And so that was then. That was the mindset then. My teammates were, I think a little bit flabbergasted by my approach. I mean, one day I'm going out to lunch with everybody else, eating meat sandwiches or burgers or the things that we ate, and wearing leather soccer shoes and basketball shoes. And then it's like a flip of a switch, and all of a sudden I wasn't. And I even started, slightly changing the group of friends I hung out with, because I started getting in friends with my sister and her friends and all the environmental kids and the recycling kids and the vegan kids and you know
Awesome.
that community. And so initially, what's really interesting is because I've been able to watch this over the last quarter century, where 25 years ago people were concerned for my health as I adopted a plant-based diet, and now fast forward 25 years later, the common message from people is that I know I should go plant-based for my health. Right?
Hey,
It's the
that's a really good point.
complete opposite mindset, and it happened in less than 25 years. I mean, it's probably happened in the last 12 years, where that mindset of you're not going to get nutrition or be healthy on a plant-based diet, to the complete opposite of I know I should adopt a plant-based diet in order to lower my cholesterol, reduce my risk of heart disease, reduce my risk of diabetes, to reduce my risk of obesity, to help reverse conditions I currently have, to feel more energetic, to drop body weight, to fill in the blank. The answer is a plant-based diet for so many people, whereas
Hmm.
before it was the concern that people had.
Absolutely. We have similar stories. You did go vegan before I did. I think it was 2003 for me, so it's been about 18 years. But my dad is also a prof, not in the environmental health sector. He's a communications prof, but both my parents are academics. So when I decided to go vegetarian and then vegan, their first response wasn't resistance necessarily, but it was like, you better do your research. Like, let's make sure you're getting all the nutrients you need. And of course, back then, without the internet and Facebook groups that are easy to access and all those things, it was more difficult. You did need to do a little bit of digging, way more than you do now, to get useful information, especially if you're an athlete.
Yeah, and what's also interesting is that obviously people will say, well, plant-based diet is so much more accessible now, restaurants, foods, and all that.
Hmm.
But I'm always quick to say, real food has always been out there all along. Produce has always been there. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains, seeds, legumes have always been there. It's just that now we have all these comfort foods, the vegan pizzas and ice creams and burgers and all these things that really were pretty scarce 25 years ago, when there was one or two brands of
Yeah.
soy milk
And
or
they weren't even that good back then.
no, they weren't that great, and it was hard to get people to adopt a plant-based diet
Hmm.
back then, because it's still a joke to this day. Like veggie burgers, these black bean or quinoa or carrot, beet, whatever they are, burgers just don't move the needle for getting people to stop eating animals, whereas Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, and other ones do. not to say those are like savior foods, or that those are like, as in they're saving the movement or anything like that with their innovation, or that those are like go-to foods. It's just that there's a much easier way to communicate a plant-based diet and vegan lifestyle now in a way that it sticks, compared to decades ago when it was much more fringe, less accessible. You had to have a co-op or natural foods grocery store nearby, and live in a town with vegan restaurants to make it anything worthwhile as far as a social setting or with friends or relationships or whatever. Whereas
Hmm.
now that's just simply not the case. It's so commonplace that anyone essentially has the opportunity to live a compassionate vegan lifestyle and have comfort foods and favorite foods accessible around them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, not to go into a whole, spiral here, but there are, of course, legitimate contexts that we need to take into account, like, economic
Sure.
status, living in a place that doesn't have access to a lot of fresh produce, cultural, food beliefs and traditions and things. Yeah, of course, these are all important things to take into consideration. But I think the point is, no matter where you are, I mean, we have someone in the middle of Australia, like in the outback, 10 hours from the closest town, who's vegan. Like, it's possible if you know how to do it.
And Karina, those are very important things you brought up. And I've written about that a little bit over the years. Not that I'm an expert, but I mention it in articles or in my books because it is important.
Hmm.
That there are cultural barriers, there are food deserts, there are access inhibitors, there are barriers put up in many places regarding religious beliefs or
Hmm.
family and cultural beliefs. Economic resources, a huge one. I mean, that was a big part of even my life. Like, because I became vegan as a teenager, I didn't have a lot of my own money to be able to buy what I wanted, and I had parents who didn't want me eating a certain way, and so I
Hmm.
had to like figure things out, like. And I obviously, I know I come from a privileged background. There's a lot of people who don't have that opportunity, and may not have access to all these great, $10 vegan burgers that you can get at restaurants in big cities like Toronto or Vancouver. Um, there's a lot of people, but what I think we're both kind of talking about is the mainstream, public at large.
Hmm.
Especially in North America, where we live, but in many developed countries around the world, the access is incredible. But also in underdeveloped countries, I've been to a number of them in Asia, in Central America, in Europe, where uh, you know, economics are a bit harder, but rice and vegetables and tofu and broccoli and stuff is abundant. And you see that in Indonesia or Thailand or Honduras and some of these places. And so I think it's a matter of perspective and priority and what kind of foods you crave and like. And for example, my wife and I spent 3 weeks on vacation visiting friends in Indonesia and Thailand, and we felt like we ate some of the healthiest, aside from the coconut milk that was in a lot of the curries. And so,
Oh, yeah.
aside from some of the coconut milk, which probably had a bit more fat than we would eat at home, we felt like we ate some of the healthiest and best food um, around in big cities like Bangkok, but also smaller cities too, and kind of out, in the countryside, because we had local tour guides who would show us around, and eating on the floor, eating literally off the ground on the floor in a little village in Indonesia where a friend of ours lives, who made the food, vegan meals for us right there. And basic and very affordable stuff that's sold on street markets, especially
Mm.
exotic fruits and such. And so there is access to the majority of people. I think sometimes we look for excuses, we look for justification of, this, that, or whatever. But I also do want to acknowledge that some of those barriers absolutely do exist. And many of us have been able to witness that firsthand, especially through global travels, where some people just have it obviously much easier than others, largely based on economics and cultural background.
Absolutely. I think it is an important aspect to keep in mind. And do you think that some of the so-called barrier could be how veganism as a movement is approached and how it's kind of North American centric at the moment?
Possibly, as far as the ethical and moral standpoints of the essence of veganism, I think plant-based diet is very common in places like Asia and other parts
Hmm.
of the world, certain parts of Europe, especially in you want to talk about like where veganism is really coined and founded in the UK, and where it's 300 vegan restaurants in England and all of that, or in London itself, I should say.
Hmm.
But I mean, I just mean the plant-based diet culture. I mean, I've spent a lot of time, probably years combined, because I used to work on cruise ships where I'd spend 8 months at a time in the Caribbean, and then 6 months at a time, or I've spent a lot of time in places like the Caribbean and Central America, um, you either on a cruise ship or going there on vacation because I enjoyed it so much. And again, this is just a very common way of eating. There's this Rastafarian way of eating in Jamaica, Untitled, plant-based diet, veganism. It's cruelty-free. It's not harming others, and in order to eat. And so some of these things, the essence of a plant-based diet is very common all over the place, whether we acknowledge that or not. But as far as how we identify with the moral and ethical stances of veganism, that taking that perspective, it certainly is very heavily focused on North America and Western Europe, and also places like you mentioned, Australia, which I've toured there for 6 weeks in total, and it's just been absolutely incredible, the response there and the rise of veganism in that country.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty amazing to see how it's just blossomed, as cliche as that sounds, worldwide in even the last, I would say, like 5 to 10 years. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, the growth was slow 25 years ago. I mean,
Yeah,
you
for
talk about
sure.
from 95 to 96, 96 to 97. I mean, these were tiny incremental things that was hard to measure. But you're right. The last 5 or 10 years have been just so big, and a lot of that has to do with media. A lot of that has to
Yeah.
do with the internet.
Hmm.
We can talk about certain documentary films, and obviously, I think Forks Over Knives was a big turning point for people in 2011. So 10 years
Definitely.
ago now. Wow,
Mhm. I know. Isn't
we're
that insane?
celebrating 10 years. Yeah, I worked for that film too. I was there in the office when we debuted the film. I was living and working in Santa Monica, and I didn't realize
Oh, cool.
this is the 10-year anniversary, like right now,
Yeah.
um, because we released it in May, I want to say. So I'll have to touch base with those guys. They're probably doing some sort of celebration.
Interesting. You know what's funny is actually this weekend is the 10-year anniversary of my own business. So we're
It
doing a
is.
big, like, 3-day online event. And talking with you isn't like officially part of the, like free events that we have for folks, but it's like a highlight of the entire thing. So I'm pretty
Part of the
stoked that
festivities. I'm
it
happy to
worked
be here.
perfectly.
I'm happy to be here for celebrating a decade of your business and a decade of your first book launch and all that stuff. And congratulations, Karina.
Well, thank you.
Congratulations and all that. It's um, as someone who is a fellow author, for me, I don't know exactly your story, but for me, it was a dream of mine, literally since third grade, to write books. I was
Yep.
eight. I was 8 years old when I decided I'm going to write books, and I wrote and laminated books back then. I still have them. I'm still in touch with my third grade teacher, Mrs. Young.
Oh, that's amazing.
I've told her about my latest book that comes out in a few months, and that's just that's one of the best feelings, to be able to share that success, because this particular dream took 33 years for me to achieve. It's a long time to keep grinding at it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I self-published books for more than a decade before I landed a deal with a publisher, which this new book is. And so, I know what it's like to be an author and to work at it and to work at it and to see your book in stores and to know that you put so much work into something that you care so much about, and you want to share that message first and foremost, and whatever comes after that, if there's opportunity to travel or give lectures or to sell lots of books or whatever, those are all bonuses. But it's really, from my view, it's communicating a message and sharing an idea of hope that some people may not get access to until they decide to pick up a book and learn about it.
Absolutely. Yes. We have very similar stories actually. It's pretty much the same actually. When I was 5, I used to make little books and give them to my parents being like, "Look, I want to be an author." It wasn't like the main thing I wanted to do. I think back then I wanted to be a naturalist/author, so it always involved animals and plant life in some form. But yeah, I actually kind of want to go the other way. I have not yet self-published anything. So I would kind of like to, though, just to kind of see the difference. There's pros and cons. You've got a lot
Yeah.
of kind of more authority on your own content and that kind of stuff. But
There
yeah,
are
it's one of those things.
We could have a completely other conversation about this, because I feel like I know that as well as anybody because
Hmm.
I've done it for 10 years, and
Yes.
I did it when I had a pretty good sized platform, even before the rise of Instagram and before Instagram was even a thing. And when there were fewer platforms, and so I had a larger presence,
Mm.
or I had
Right.
a stronger voice, I should say.
Hmm.
It gets more watered down as far as an individual. The movement grows as a whole, which is great, but as far as an individual, I think individual voices get watered down a little bit as the pool gets bigger.
Yes.
But it's for the greater good, so it's a positive. But yeah, I mean, I could tell you all kinds of stories, pros and cons of self-publishing, which is also it's a big part of my journey, which makes this new book, the plant-based athlete book, so exciting because when I self-published, I was doing this over 10 years ago and didn't have a lot of money. And I was like literally driving from town to town and sleeping in my car. And, like the old stories you read about people selling books out of their trunk. I was literally doing that and crashing
Right.
on couches, strangers' houses, as well as people I knew, sleeping on floors, but mostly just me in my car, just me and my Prius driving around, just trying to make it. And the things you learn about yourself during that process, like, is it worth it? Man, I thought I'd be so much further ahead than this. Um, do I have self-worth? Is my message even worth communicating? Should I quit? Or this is great, I'm on top of the world. I'm a self-published
Hmm.
author getting all expenses paid trips to Australia and Asia and Europe to go speak. And how did this happen? And why me? And I'm not as big as the other guys. There's so many better vegan bodybuilders. I just happen to be first or very early. All this stuff runs through your mind. And it often comes back to, have I earned this, or do I deserve this? Is someone else better to carry the message? And that's actually what I think about, which is a hard thing to think about, because for me it's message first, not
Mm.
me first. It's always message and we first. And if there's someone I feel is better to communicate that, then I get behind them. And I've done that most of my life, and you can see it with my support of Forks Over Knives or the Game Changers, or anyone, Brendan Brazier, Rich Roll, people who have big projects. I try to get behind it. I just ordered your book. I know I've got one on the way, but I've got another one on the way now.
I sent you one, man.
I know, but I ordered another one.
Well,
And
thank you.
I have the Vegan Vitality. I've got I've got other ones at home. And that's one of the things that I try to do, is support other writers and authors in many different ways, but
Hmm.
largely ordering their books, because I know what it feels like to have someone order your book. Like, it's like, that someone cares to read what you have to say is amazing. I mean, whether you have an audience of hundreds of thousands or an audience of 3 people, it's cool that 3 people even care. In a world where there's so much apathy and there's so much me, and there's so much noise and everyone promoting themselves. And for good reason. A lot of people are entrepreneurial and they have important messages to share. It's just nice when people do acknowledge your work and are willing to pick up a copy. And I love that
Absolutely.
feeling. And so that's what I try to give that feeling to other fellow authors out there.
Well, you just did. Thanks, Robert. And also, thanks again for writing the foreword to this book. It's the second edition that just came out. So your
Yeah.
foreword is now technically in 2 different books, Vegan
Well, that's
Vitality
yeah.
and the new edition, which is The Vegan Athlete.
Well, and that's exciting too, Karina. That's fun to be asked to write a foreword. I've done that for a few books now. And that's a lot of fun, to see your name, like, either on the cover or inside cover, or
Oh,
just.
it's on the cover.
No, I know, and I know I've been sent you. I think I sent you a photo months ago when I was in a Barnes and Noble here in Colorado. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that. You sent me a text on Instagram.
Yeah, yeah. Because I'm like, hey, your book is here in the bookstore, and like there it is, and there's
So
my
awesome.
name. And yeah, it was a cool thing because I just moved to town. We're dealing with the pandemic. I'm new to
Mm.
the city, and just to go into a store and see your name and my name, it was just like a surreal feeling, because I told you, I said, yeah, I know what it feels like to have your book in stores, but I'm only in a few stores. Like, I've been able to see it and experience that, but I haven't really on a big scale. These are just like random stores, and many of them,
Hmm.
quite frankly, have been like thrift shops and such, where my books are on the shelves. Um, because I've only self-published, and so now I'm finally going to be, legitimately in those Barnes and Noble.
Oh,
And
you're going to be
I would tell you
everywhere.
real quick story, 30-second story. I would actually, with this book called Half Price Books in Arizona, where I lived. It's a pretty good sized chain. I think it's in Texas and other places. It's called Half Price Books, where you get books at discount, obviously. And so I just, for the excitement of wanting to see my book on the shelves, I took copies that I paid for. I bought my own book online from Amazon and then resold it to half price books for like $1. They gave me like $1 or $2 for it. It was brand new. It's brand new, brand new book. They paid me like $1 or $2 and put it on the shelf. And I went back and took pictures of my phone. It's like the diet nutrition section. It has like shred it and plant-based muscle. I'm like, yes.
Yes.
But I totally I totally lost money on that transaction just to get my name out there. But that's the kind of stuff that I would do because I was chasing this dream and wanting to be in bookstores. And like, if that's what it took, I was gonna, and then that allows people to buy my book at a discount too. You can get a book for $10 at that kind of store. So I lost money, but I got the chance to fulfill another step of that dream in the process. So
exactly. That is hilarious and genius. And it literally paid off. Let's talk about this new book. It's amazing. So you partnered with Matt Fraser, is that right?
Yeah, Matt Fraser from No Meat Athlete. We are longtime colleagues. In fact, we met about 10 years ago. I was on tour. I met him like twice during the same time. So I don't know if it was first in DC or in Baltimore. I want to say DC. I was giving a talk in Washington, DC, and he was in the audience. And I kind of, I knew of him and he knew of me. We hadn't met. His blog was pretty new. It was only like a year or two old, the No Meat Athlete blog. And I think I saw him probably wearing the t-shirt in the audience. And I kind of knew that.
You're like, oh, I know that guy.
Yeah, that must be the guy. And then we went out to dinner in Baltimore, which is nearby DC. I don't know if it's an hour away or so. That may have been during the same trip or another tour stop when I was in that part of the country within that same time period. And, we've worked together in some capacity really ever since. I've written an endorsement quote or been involved in every one of the books that he's written. He's done the same for me. It provided some sort of endorsement for every book that I've written. And we've just been on these similar paths of promoting the plant-based diet to a wide and diverse audience. And so he reaches more of a runner and long distance athlete audience. He's a long distance runner. He qualified for the Boston Marathon and he mostly was writing about running. It was really a running blog for years. It was all about running.
I remember those days.
Yeah, picking out your shoes and tempo and all this stuff. And I was doing bodybuilding, running, bodybuilding. So all these years later, and we've been on tour together out in the Caribbean on this yearly vegan cruise that is currently on hold, of course, with COVID. But, I was a speaker for 10 years there. He was a speaker maybe for three or four of those years. And, I've had this idea for the plant-based athlete for a long time. It actually goes back. The story is even more kind of crazy, but I'll briefly tell it. I wrote this proposal for the plant-based athlete in 2013. And I pitched it even as my own. I did have an agent, but I pitched it on my own at first to a publisher, and it almost got picked up. I was actually living in Canada for that summer, in Victoria, and I was having my cousin who's brilliant. She's a environmental lawyer, and my friend who just got his PhD. They were both helping me with the proposal. I felt super confident, super pumped. Ultimately, that publisher passed on that book, and which is funny. A couple years later, Matt Fraser got published by that very publisher.
Oh, no way.
And his book went on to do really well. I'm talking like sold over 100,000 copies.
Amazing.
His No Meat Athlete cookbook. And, that was the publisher that I was hoping for. And so, I went back and self-published Shred It because, my plant-based athlete book didn't work out. And then I co-authored Plant-Based Muscle with Vanessa Espinoza. And then I wrote an ebook only. A separate, it was still 232 pages, but it was an ebook about building a vegan brand.
I read that. It is genius. It's excellent.
Yeah, there's a lot of good, and I still use a lot of those principles today that have really helped me a lot with Vegan Strong and other brands. Like there's some good things in there. I mean, it actually was one of the most fun books to write. It's how to build a successful vegan brand. And, I was part of Vega for 10 years, part of Forks Over Knives. I've worked with Beyond Meat for many years, Vegan Essentials. I've been part of a lot of great vegan companies and organizations. So I feel like I have some good things to share. And then I've been building my own brand, Vegan Bodybuilding, and now with Vegan Strong. But just on that note, like that's how rich this history is with me and Matt. I mean, I had this idea 8 years ago, didn't quite work out. But as I released more books and he released more books and our brands grew, I flew out to Florida where he was attending a conference. And I deliberately, I knew he was going to be at this conference. I flew all the way across the country from Arizona to
No
Florida.
way.
And I showed up there and met up with him and said, hey, you want to go for a walk? It was really funny. Like, that's literally how it went down. I said, hey, you want to go on a walk with me outside for a little bit? And so we went on the boardwalk, along the beach in like Fort Lauderdale area. And I said, hey, this is what I've been thinking about, this plant-based athlete book, where we feature, we basically tell the compelling stories of the world's greatest plant-based athletes. And then we share, obviously plant-based nutrition and fitness advice and meal plans and recipes and all that. But we really amplify these stories of James Wilkes and Rich Roll and Fiona Oakes and Dotsie Bausch and all these, Megan Duhamel, Canadian, and others. And sure enough, all of them are in our new book. And so he said, yeah, I'm in. And so we worked together, and it's been a long process, like 2.5 years in the making. But we did land finally a major publisher, and we've been working like crazy. And the book comes out June 15th. It's available for pre-order right now, which is, we announced it on my 41st birthday on March 2nd. So it's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and I think everywhere else. And in a nutshell, Karina, this book, that is what we do. We tell the compelling stories of the world's greatest plant-based athletes. I personally interviewed about 60, including at least a dozen Olympians, probably more than a dozen, maybe 24 world champions, and tons of professional athletes from, whether it's former NFL, NHL, current world record holders, current Olympic gold medalists like David Verberg, who's on the U.S. Olympic sprinting team and is a gold medalist, Dotsie Bausch, of course, and Scott Jurek, one of the greatest runners in the history of running, not just in the vegan world, and Rip Esselstyn, Brendan Brazier, a lot of the ones you suspect, Laura Klein, who's a world champion duathlete, one of the most dominant ever in her sport, Darcy Gaither, who's a world record holding kayaker, just a whole bunch of people. Like I said, Megan Duhamel, Olympic gold medalist in figure skating, Canadian world champion, the whole thing. And furthermore, not only do we interview them, they provide their day in the life, their sample day in the life, like their routine, like what they do morning till night, their workouts, their meals, whatever. They provided recipes. So, most books have recipes. Most like vegan books have some sort of recipes, typically by the author or by a recipe specialist, a chef or something. Ours come directly from the athletes.
Well, that's pretty brilliant.
So these are recipes from Vanessa Espinosa, who is just as good as it gets, pound for pound, as an athlete on the planet. I mean,
she's a beast.
She's been vegan for 20 years. She was an All-American basketball player, drafted into the WNBA, is a 3-time Golden Gloves state champion boxer. She almost set a world record in her first ever powerlifting meet. And she is pound for pound the strongest person I know, period. Like we've literally leg pressed 1,000 pounds together, and she weighs 130.
Wow.
She presses 110-pound dumbbells in each hand. Like,
that's incredible.
She pulls 400 pounds off the ground in deadlifts, 3 times her body weight. So we get her recipes. We get, Natalie Matthews and her recipes. She also happens to be a chef, as well as one of the top bikini athletes on the planet. And a former professional surfer. So she's professional in 2 sports, and vegan and a chef. So we get her recipes. We get some from Rip Esselstyn and Brendan Brazier, Fiona Oakes, who owns 4 Guinness World Records in marathon running. There's a bunch of others. Brianna Wigley, who's a IFBB pro bikini competitor. You get recipes from me and Matt Fraser. James Wilkes from the Game Changers contributed one, as well as a day in the life recap and as well as his story. Robbie Ballinger, one of my favorite stories in the book, who ran across America 3,175 miles in 75 days. That's an average of, I think, 43 miles a day, more than a marathon and a half per day, every day, en route from California to New York, and like what that was like, and the fuel that he used to do that, and the mental strength. And then you get someone like Josh Lajani, who weighed 420 pounds. And you think, okay, well, maybe he's a weightlifter or something. No, he's an ultra marathon champion. He actually has won ultra marathons. He's like won a 100-mile race and been second and third in decent sized races.
Wow,
he's
that's
like,
incredible.
Yeah, he's legitimate. I mean, he's fast enough to qualify for Boston Marathon, and he was 420 pounds. And people who overcame drug addiction and suicide attempts. And they talk about that. En route, like Dotsie Bausch, she's open about that. She was suicidal um, addicted to drugs, cocaine and all this stuff, and then went on to be an Olympic silver medalist. And the stories go on, and that's what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted with this book, because there's a million ways to promote a plant-based diet with beautiful food or recipes or compassion or animal rights or whatever. But for the plant-based athlete, I wanted to show this is how the best in the world do it. You want to know how Rip Esselstyn set world record, which he just did a year and a half ago in swimming? You want to know how Scott Jurek became one of the best on the planet? Or Christine Vardaros, or one of the best cyclocross racers in the world, or now Orla Walsh, who's a national champion in Ireland and multiple distances in track cycling, or Caitlin Cook, who's a Estonian national champion in like 3 different divisions of cycling. Like I talk to these people, some over the phone, some over something like this, like Zoom, some email, like some in person. I met like it was crazy. I met something like 5 Olympic athletes like at the same time in the same room, and it was organized by Dotsie Bausch, and I'm so grateful. I even put her in the acknowledgments that she invited me, because she was doing her own campaign, like filming TV commercials for the Olympics and all this, and she like knew I was writing this book, and she said, Robert, come on down. You're gonna meet Heather Mitts, a 3-time Olympic gold medalist. You're going to meet Rebecca Soni, a 6-time Olympic medalist, like I think gold medalist too, or at least a handful of gold medals. George Laraque was there, NHL. George Laraque, I'm sure he's
That's
just
amazing,
iconic guy. Rich Roll was there. Derek Morgan from the NFL Tennessee Titans, and also in the Game Changers, was there. It was just so cool. And that's what this book is about. And obviously I'm kind of going on and on about it because my enthusiasm is high, because I've wanted this book to be out there. And it's not about me. I mean, I'm just one random dude who gained 100 pounds and basically been like a kind of amateur athlete most of my life. I had the opportunity to sit down with people who are legitimately the best in the entire world at what they do. And it was fascinating.
That is incredible. I had no idea there was this much involved. Like I just hit buy and I'm like, dude, I cannot wait until this comes out. June 15th, right?
Yeah.
But I actually didn't know that it was so in depth and so story driven around athletes and their own struggles, challenges, routines, recipes. Like that is freaking awesome.
There's even a grocery shopping section, like what, a Julia Murray, who I think you probably know, another Canadian Olympian in skiing, what she eats, or what Sonia Looney, another Canadian world champion.
I see a theme here.
I know. Kevin Hill, Shonda Hill, more Canadians, a world champion and Olympian. Kevin Hill, a 2-time Olympian, in the book. Some people have more developed stories than others, and that was basically the way the interviews went. And there were even, I interviewed like legitimately 2 or 3 different world champion boxers, like, they're in different weight classes and different federations, but like world, like, hi, I'm the best in the world at boxing. Like, it's kind of crazy. One from Israel, one from, I think, Germany, and then a national champion here from the US. And then of course, Vanessa, who's a, regional champion, but not all of them turn into stories for the book. You can only, we could only fit.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And partly just based on how the conversations went and what I had to work with. There were some people that gave me so much to work with that their story is just, their story could be its own book.
I was just going to say, it sounds like that could be a whole other volume.
and I think, for some of these people who are not already authors, they're going to take that route, even after this, this interview process, because as you probably know, because you've worked with publishers, and this was my first time, I had to go back over and over and over. So it wasn't like, I felt like I was bothering people for 6 months straight. Hey, I need a little more of this. I need a little more of that. And some people just didn't respond after a while. Like,
oh, this joker again. Great.
Yeah, really, unfortunately, that's how it went. And for some people, and so they only have some quotes in the book, even if it's like, man, I really wanted this Olympic gold medalist. Like I want to like amplify their story, but I just wasn't getting it. They just, either ignoring me or that's all they wanted to give. And so I acknowledge.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, I acknowledged everyone I talked to in the front of the book, their name, even though some of them never made it, even their quotes didn't make it into the book. That's just how it works too. That's another bummer, like the difference between self-publishing and big publisher is that when I self-publish, I've got control over all of that. And if it's like a friend
Exactly.
or a role model or someone I really look up to, I want their quote in the book, right? But the publisher says, nope. And that removed, like,
Mhm.
in one round of editing, we removed like 30 people from the book, where that was their only participation in the book was those quotes, and they got taken out. So
Yeah.
that's how it goes. But I feel like if this book does well, and we hope it does,
Oh, I'm
and
sure it will.
resonates with people and inspires people, and you've already heard a lot of the reasons why. I mean, you're going to get the inside scoop and how the greatest plant-based athletes in the world eat, live, and train, including their grocery shopping lists in some cases, their day in the life routines, their recipes, like what they really do. Like, and you'd be surprised, Karina. It's kind of like, I can't believe how many like how many elite athletes love Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Like, because you put them on a pedestal.
This is so awesome.
Like you put this, like, in my mind at least, I thought these athletes were like the equivalent of like a Dr. T. Colin Campbell nutrition approach, like that they were just, or Esselstyn, they're very, precise. And I mean, you have to be the best in the world, right? Or
Yeah.
so I thought. But that's what you
That's what
find
I
out.
thought.
That's what you find out. That you find out that nobody's perfect, that some people don't get as much sleep as they should. Some people eat vegan ice cream almost every night, even though they set national records in their sport. That some people don't use any supplements aside from B12. Some people use lots of supplements. And that, Karina, was one of the hardest parts of the book, I have to tell you. One of the hardest parts of the book, because it's like 350 pages. There's a lot of other material too, besides athlete stories, right? I mean, there's a ton of it. There's chapters about plant-based nutrition and calorie density, and a dedicated chapter to protein, carbohydrates, fats, recovery, nutrient density, all these different things. So to take all this body of information and evidence-based studies, we cited, tons of evidence-based studies, including some of the recent ones, even the February 2021 study that was just recently published. We put it in the last minute. Like, the book goes off
That's
to
awesome.
print, like,
Nicely done.
like it literally goes off to print like today or Monday or something. Like, the deadline was a couple of days ago for any changes. But we were able to squeeze that in, if they put it in there. Right? They still have to let me know if they added it or not. But we have evidence-based studies in there. So we have all of this stuff, this body of literature, and then to try to get real life athletes to map onto that doesn't always work. But that was also really fascinating and enlightening, that there is no one size fits all. You'd think that if everybody would eat the same legumes, leafy greens, certain grains, fruits, and a certain amount of vegetables, and calorie intake and protein ratios, like, we'd all perform the same. But it's not the way it works. And that's what actually humanizes a lot of these people, because even though as an athlete, and I excelled to some degree, actually, if I'm being fair, probably more in running than I did in bodybuilding, but like, I can't even relate. I just can't relate to some of these athletes who do these just incredible feats, like how does Scott Jurek run 6 marathons in one day and
Yeah.
set
Seriously.
the world record for most miles run at something like 165 miles in a single day in a road race? So I can't comprehend that. I also can't comprehend being 420 pounds and then losing 240 pounds or 260 or whatever, and then be down to 180 and running over 100 miles and winning. I can't. Or Sonia Looney, out in the Sahara Desert and in the Himalayan mountains, doing mountain bike. I can't relate. But in a way, I can, because when I look at their what enabled them to do that, their discipline, their training, their dedication, their passion. And that's the thing that you find. Like, you have to find dots that connect the stories, because they're out there, and they're easy to miss if you're not looking for them. But that's what you'll find. And the way I can actually sum it up in 2 words, the people who succeed and achieve over and over again, it all comes down to showing up. They just show up. They just show up, at the start line. They show up in the gym. They show up in the kitchen. They just show up. Anytime there's an opportunity to quit, or walk away, or throw in the towel, or do something different, they just keep showing up. And that's one thing that I took away from the interviews, and what I've applied, to my own life, like where my training is continue to excel, in my 40s and step it up a notch, because I look at these men and women who I've had the great pleasure of interviewing and realized that they had similar goals, similar dreams. Not that I wanted to win some, bike ride in the Himalayas, but I wanted to find fulfillment, right? That's what it's about. It's about, we all wanted to find personal fulfillment. I wanted to get bigger and stronger. I did it. I'm talking to you. I weigh 220 pounds as I'm talking to you. Like, I was able to do it, and I can look at the patterns that I used of showing up day after day, even in the face of adversity or in the face of, challenges, in a way that's similar to how other people showed up. So I think the book it's been described as stunning by the publisher. The copy editor, who I don't think is plant-based at all, described it as life-changing. Glowing endorsements from Dr. Campbell and Esselstyn and Brenda Davis, another Canadian, and John Robbins, one of my all-time heroes. I mean, from Diet for a New America. That's, I just can't help but think this book is going to help so many people learn so much about themselves and about what a plant-based diet can do for them to achieve what they really want to achieve in their active lifestyle.
Absolutely fascinating. I cannot wait. Something I was thinking about when you were talking about, like, yeah, sure, we can have all these, Esselstyn style, wave a magic wand, ideal diets, but then you go into real life and
Yeah.
and like the logistics and what are these folks actually doing on a day-to-day basis. I kind of feel like that is going to be a game changer in the vegan movement, where I don't know about you, but I feel like there's a lot of all or nothing thinking. Like,
Yeah.
either you're 100% raw or you're doing vegan wrong, or either
Right.
you're 100% whole foods, no oil, or you're doing vegan wrong. I feel like there's still a lot of that in the vegan movement. And so something like this, where you're saying, well, not only is there no one size fits all approach, but there's no one size fits all approach in the world's greatest athletes. That's huge.
Yeah. And at first I saw it almost like a negative at first, because I'm like, man, here's what the literature says. I was actually having this conversation with James Wilks recently, the creator of the Game Changers,
Mm-hmm.
who was able to sympathize with me, because I'm like, okay, here's what the literature says. And I think you and I are probably on the same page. We both come from academic backgrounds. My father's professor, PhD. So is my uncle. My older sister, who encouraged me to be vegan, is also a PhD professor. I'm not, but we come from these academic backgrounds. And so I really like the evidence-based nutrition. Like, I never used to be. I was always just like young 20-something-year-old weightlifter, random dude, building a website. But now I hang around Campbell and Esselstyn and Gregor and so many others, Brenda Davis. Really, I mean, that's a key demographic in my group of colleagues. Speaking on the vegan cruise or these health conferences or wellness conferences. Like, I see them a lot, and so I focus a lot more on that evidence-based nutrition now. And so I'm like talking to James, like, man, so here's what the science says. Here's what the studies actually say. Why is it that all these athletes do stuff totally differently?
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to human nature. It comes down to habit forming. It comes down to cultural backgrounds. It comes down to preferences, how we manage the 1,440 minutes we have every day. So I know you want to talk about protein. Like, that's the thing. There's basically concrete or fairly consensus recommendations on protein intake in general and protein intake for athletes. And, that's, I don't know, somewhere around 1.2 to 2 kilograms or grams per kilogram of body weight. And, you can do the math and figure out how many grams that is for an individual. But it's pretty, well understood. Yet athletes at the top of their game, including in strength sports where protein you'd think would be a huge factor, differ in their intake. In some cases, very significantly. Like, we've got one guy who's in the book, Nick Squires. You might be familiar with him. He's kind of a hilarious character on Twitter. Like Meaty McCorsley is his name or something. But he's a international record holder in powerlifting. I mean, he's a strong dude. He's also the record holder in the state of California, which, by the way, has more people in it than Canada. 39 million or something in California. He is a legitimately very strong guy, and he eats protein all day long. Beyond burgers, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and all this stuff. Yet there's other powerlifters you know, that have great world-class success who don't emphasize protein intake at all, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's me, you know, I know you're probably going to get to it at some point. You know, I have my own controversial approach. People have an opinion about it, you know, because I make it public. But, you know, I personally have not used protein supplementation since 2012, uh,
Mm.
9 years. And at that point, I was actually retired from bodybuilding, got back into long distance running, and got down to a body weight of 165 pounds. And I actually found pretty good success in running during that time, my early 30s, and have since gone from 165 to 220 on a very, very modest protein intake with no protein supplementation and little emphasis on high protein foods like tofu and tempeh and seitan. And that's just part of my truth. And some people know that, some don't. In fact, when I document it in Chronometer, or, you know, for my own sample day in a life, I'm often consuming under 100 grams of protein per day, sometimes 75 grams, weighing 220
Mm.
pounds. People say that's not possible. I've been doing it for 10 years. I mean, you tell me. Like, that's the thing. The human body is so different that, and then when you talk to Olympic athletes, and I don't know if you have this experience, check this out. And this may not be a shocker for you, but it could be for a lot of people listening. You ready for this? There are a lot of Olympic athletes. So we're talking basically best athletes on the planet who did not use sports supplements because they feared a failing drug test, including, you
Mm.
know, if it was whey protein or you know, anything else, any kind of protein, whether, you know, vegan or not vegan at the time. These are Olympic athletes I talked to in person, I talked to via email, and they said, no, we didn't touch the supplements because if we fail the drug test, because there, you know, some hidden ingredient, our Olympic dream since we were a kid is over. And
Hmm.
so I found that to be fascinating because, you know, general recommendations for most people, plant-based or not, are vitamin B12 is recommended for everybody. Vitamin D recommended for many people. DHA, EPA, omega-3 essential fats recommended for many, many people. And then, you know, for some people, protein powders or other things, you know, more of a multivitamin or meal replacement, or, you know, added protein for their sport. Yet there are many people who excel in athletics who don't use that. And it's what makes the book very challenging and frustrating to write, but it also makes me step back and realize there is this human element that each individual has, and that nobody's perfect, or nobody behind the scenes is what they look like on social media. You know, I don't look like, you know, super ripped all the time. Like when I get the lighting just right and I have a mirror to look at to gauge, you know, how I'm coming across. So there's another layer to it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we reveal that, and that's why I joked. I'm like, man, I can't believe how many times, you know, you search in the document for Ben and Jerry's, how many times it pops up. Like, I didn't know that was like a popular thing among vegan athletes, but it turns out when you work really, really hard, 6, 7 days a week, that's a nice thing to relax and kick your feet up, you know. And that has to be acknowledged, I think, and in a way respected, because like you just said, we have this perception that people are perfect, like, or like, you know, like Esselstyn even says, you know, my son, you know, he's like, my son is plant strong, I'm plant perfect, you know. And so uh like sometimes we think that, but then when I've spent time with some of these people, I even have photos with like me and Dr. Greger on the vegan cruise, and he's got a plate, you know, with pizza on it, and I'm hanging out with Dr. Campbell at midnight on the cruise eating vegan pizza, and I'm like, oh, I can relax a little bit, because I always thought to get these guys in their endorsement of my work, I had to be perfect too. And turns
Mm-hmm.
out, you know, they're not. They're human too. And so that allowed me to feel that way. And I think writing this book allowed a lot of the athletes to feel that way as well, that they could kind of reveal what their real lifestyle is. And I think readers are just going to find that so interesting, and including the stories. I already gave, you know, I gave some of it away, people losing weight and setting records or overcoming addiction. And there's plenty of other stories I didn't mention. There's a bunch of athletes I didn't mention by name, so those will be a surprise to you and
Mm.
everybody else. But it's gonna be a fun one.
I'm looking forward to it. I think the point about perfect that you made is a really important one, Robert. Like, yeah, we do put these professional athletes on a pedestal. Yeah, we do often expect, you know, if you're not 100% on point with whatever diet you set out for yourself, you're going to immediately fail, you know? So yeah, everyone's human. I'd also like to put forth the concept though that maybe you are still perfect if you're eating pizza. Like that's not a bad thing. What's
Yeah,
the rest of your diet like? You
yeah,
know? I mean,
yeah.
maybe that's part of your actual plan and your way of looking at nutrition.
Right. I'm so getting on board with that these days because I have a horrible work addiction as well. I'm one of these people, you probably saw me obnoxiously for over a decade, glamorizing, working 15 hours a day.
I did the same
I'm,
thing.
I get old notifications from Facebook where I'm like, haven't slept in 24 straight hours. I've taken four flights over the last day and a half, and I'm like, and I would brag about this stuff, to be honest, to keep it
Hmm.
real. I would
Oh, I
would
used to do the same
glamorize
thing.
this.
I'm right there with you.
I always thought, because I had this entrepreneurial mindset from when I was a kid, like I'm going to outwork everybody in the room. That's the only way I made it as a vegan bodybuilder. I had no business being here. I was some skinny farm kid who became vegan. I have no business winning bodybuilding competitions, but I did. Now what? I have no business writing books. I don't have a background in that. And I became a self-published bestseller and sold over $1 million worth of books and toured around the world. Now what? Like I had this, but a lot of it was ego. I realized a lot of it was ego, and that I was projecting something that I thought made me look awesome. But really what it was like, in some ways, making other people feel bad or inadequate, that they weren't as driven. But you don't have to be. That's what it took me a long time to realize, that you
Hmm.
don't have to set out to be the best in the world at something. That's something that I wanted to do. That's a very rare goal, to be the best in the world at something. Like most people don't have that, and most people just want to be happy. And I'm so big on that now, that like when I wrote Shred It, I was so just on top of the world, getting endorsements from Campbell and Esselstyn, that I wouldn't eat anything that processed or with oil, or at least for a period of time. And I'm still supplement free aside from B12 and occasionally vitamin D and DHA EPA, but no sports supplements or anything in about a decade. But I realized, like, yeah, it's the total body of work. Like where are the total 3,000 calories coming from? At least that's my rough intake. And so something like pizza or burger or lasagna or ice cream or popsicle is okay, because I'm working 2 hours a day in the gym. I'm going on dog walks, getting fresh air. I'm staying hydrated. I'm eating other good quality calories, lots of fruits and vegetables, and it's okay, and it took me, like, that's the thing. And you've probably experienced this too about writing. You learn so much about yourself. Like,
Hmm.
wow, I didn't know I had either this addiction, this habit, this absent, this maybe food absence from my diet, or that I have so much more to learn, or that I'm kind of too stuck in my ways, or I'm too rigid. I need to be more flexible. Like, that's helped me. And so I want to thank actually a lot of the people that I interviewed for this book, that helped me reflect on my own life, and helped me make some changes that have helped me,
Hmm.
even as an athlete of a plant-based athlete of 26 years, to be better. And so that's another thing that I got out of this experience.
Wow, this is huge. Was that one of the main turning points for the work related portion of our discussion? Like, I mean, I know the diet is kind of a separate piece, but I'm totally with you, man. Like, if I look at my old Facebook posts, it's about
Yeah.
like how many jobs I have at once, back 15 years ago, and how many projects are happening and blah blah blah. But there was a turning point for me. It was actually kind of in progress already, but what was really the catalyst was what I call the anxiety shitstorm, where I just like
Yeah.
it crept up on me and then just went, screw you. You are completely debilitated for 3 weeks. You can't do anything. Took about a year to get out of it. And so, like, for me, there was a very clear catalyst like, okay, I got to look at my work habits here. But was it kind of more of an organic experience for you?
Well, I have to say it's a few things, and I think it's beyond just anxiety, and that's something I've told you that I deal with. But I want to be honest too. I think it's a bit of insecurity as well. If I
Mm,
can project that I'm outworking everybody else, that helps me cover up some of my shortcomings.
yeah,
That
that's a good point.
I know that I have. Like, I'm not like oblivious to the fact that my education isn't what it could be, or that my achievements in bodybuilding are really, I was early, it was less competitive. I wasn't ever great at it. I was just early when the bodybuilders kind of sucked, and like, and I found some success. Like, I'm aware of that stuff, and that does feel like a bit of insecurity. I was never that
Hmm.
great, yet I'm hailed as this, or heralded, whatever the word is. See, there's the lack of education coming through. As this innovator in vegan bodybuilding. And I certainly was, but a lot of it had to do with just being a go-getter. I just put the pedal to the metal when other people weren't doing it. And that's what created an opportunity for me to have my career. And now my second career, which is writing, which is what I always wanted to do from age 8 anyway. But it's something that, Karina, it's been kind of brewing for a while. Like, I know I've been a workaholic and obsessive compulsive about it, but I also hung around a community that supported it. The early days of Gary Vaynerchuk, for example, I first met Gary in 2009 on his Crush It tour before he was like super popular. I mean, this is like 11, 12 years ago. I met Gary a long time ago. In person, 2009, 2010, I think 2012, like a bunch of events. And I kind of got into that entrepreneurial community, even if I just mean like on, Twitter and Facebook and social media. I had the opportunity to meet Tim Ferriss and a lot of people we would consider to be great entrepreneurs or innovators or business people or people into hustle and, all this like 24/7 hustle. And I used to even buy those t-shirts that would say things like that, like hustle 24/7, 365. Like, oh man, I mean, I got so into it that I thought that was cool to just basically to burn yourself into the ground. And I achieved burnout a number of times where you just say like, screw it all, man. I want to quit everything. And that's not sustainable and that's not healthy. And so that's certainly come across my path. Even recently, like, I'm working with Vegan Strong, this nonprofit vegan athlete organization, full time. I'm having to write this book that's taken a year longer than planned. And so now it's like everything's at the same time and deadlines pop up constantly. Then there's marketing the book because we have strong aspirations of making this a bestseller. And, we have Dr. Greger wrote the foreword. Matt Fraser is my co-author, endorsed by all these great people. I mean, amazing athletes are featured in the book, from Rich Roll to Scott Jurek, all the rest. Like, we have big aspirations, but it comes with an incredible level of stress and anxiety and expectation. And, I mean, I talk more and more and more about, I would just love to live in a beach community in a foreign country and eat fruit and exercise outside in warm weather and hang out with the locals and be off the internet, like for good, basically. Keep in touch with my family and friends through, text message or phone, but like leave the internet behind, like, period. And it's weird. Like I go through phases of like where I'm like anti-capitalism, yet I'm benefiting from it. Here I have a major book that's gonna be in every bookstore in America. I even hear it's gonna be in Chapters and all these places throughout Canada. I'm benefiting from a system that I don't always appreciate, capitalism. And so that's another conversation, but it's something that I have to internalize and deal with as someone who is an athlete now turned author and, trying to spread this message, but I have to do it in a capitalistic way, basically, because, you got to sell books. The publishers got to get their money back, So
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's there've been a lot of, bumps along the road that do lead to anxiety and burnout and those types of things. And certainly being a workaholic has been part of that. I do want to give a shout out to my friend Jordan Baskerville, because not only have I known him since preschool, and he's the person I was going to lunch with every day when I became vegan. He's also the person that introduced me to the sport of bodybuilding and has helped me with every single one of my books. We've been, good friends and basically, best friends these days. He's the one I visited in Thailand when I was going out there. Like, he went with me when I met Arnold Schwarzenegger for my 21st birthday. We got our photos with Arnold. That's what we did for our 21st birthdays. And he, for years and years and years, has been giving me subtle and also not so subtle advice on how to bring it down, because I'm lifetime drug and alcohol free, but I was basically on a big drug addiction of work, of dopamine, like hustle. 24/7 is so awesome. Like, that was my drug. I've never touched alcohol, cigarettes, whatever, drug and alcohol free lifetime, and now supplement free for 10 years too, aside from B12. I'm like, on paper, like the most boring person in the room, but I was addicted to this drug of basically how me projecting what my life is like to an audience and their response, how that made me feel. It justified that I'm doing all this great work. Like, look, I'm out there changing the world and all this stuff because I'm working so hard. When really, behind the scenes, you pull back the curtain, I'm burning myself out, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not sustainable. And people can joke about that and talk about it like, oh man, I can't believe that guy's, burned out. Or, we see it in other people. Like I've seen other vegan activists, and including people who come from a very, privileged background of, being a white male and educated and great, economic status, and being in America and have every advantage. And, burnout is still, it's still there if you put yourself in that situation. So,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I've been dealing with that. And, I'm just hoping this book does really well, and that I can, even on a personal level for my own, like, I don't know, mental health, just take a step back a little bit and say, man, I've worked for this for 33 years. I got the message out there. It reached a lot of people. Let me regroup for a little bit, and maybe I can come out with a part 2 of this book, when the time is right.
Absolutely. You make a really good point. I think there's an aspect of this whole workaholic construct that is very personal, like how we are putting ourselves out into the world and why. But also, I mean, our whole society is basically built on this whole concept of hashtag hustle. And, like we're not actually learning strategies for managing workloads and preventing burnout. Like we live in a society of overworkedness, if that's even a word. So I feel like there's a
Yeah.
part of it that's kind of like how people grow up not being vegan. It's just the thing that happens, and then it takes that extra little bit of effort to break out from that norm, I think.
And one of the challenges is, Karina, is ego. Like
Yeah,
we
sure.
all want attention. When, um, even before the internet, like we all wanted attention from our
Mhm.
peers, our teachers, our parents, our siblings. Like we're all in this desperate need for attention, because we want to feel acknowledged. We want to feel important. We want to feel heard. We want to be recognized. Like that's just in us. Yes, you can be an introvert. Yes, you can be an extrovert. But at the end of the day, we want to feel appreciated. We want to feel acknowledged. And the internet and social media allow us to do that. We can post, photos on social media, and be told how pretty and handsome and fit and strong and all this we are. And we're addicted to that. And you can deny it and say, no, that's not me. I don't fall into that category. I'm self-aware. No. We're all impacted by it. Whether you want to, you can be honest about it or not. You can lie about it and say it doesn't impact you, or you can be honest about it, just embrace it and realize there's a reason why we check our phones something like 150 times per day. We're absolutely addicted to it. I mean, what do you do when you're at a red light when you're driving? Look at your phone. What do you do when you're waiting in line in the grocery store? Look at your phone. What do you do when you're bored or you're feeling like underappreciated or left out? You post something on social media, like you find your best photo and post. Okay, good. And compliments are coming back in. There's this insecurity. There's this need for uplifting of ego. And that's okay, because we used to get that probably from our parents, from our teachers, from our, in our small community,
Mhm.
our sports teams, our teammates. Like, we would feel good from the 5 or 6 people we spent time around. But now it's, thousands of strangers on the internet that we're trying to, appeal to. And maybe that's not serving us so well, in a lot of cases. And so, I'm just, for me, I'm trying to get more, it's cliche to say, I know you've used that word already, I think, try to get back to my authentic self.
Mhm.
And that's a long discovery period. And it's a quest, and it's a pursuit that doesn't happen overnight, doesn't even happen, in a
Well, it's
year.
lifelong, I would say.
Yeah, it is. It's a lifelong, it's a lifelong pursuit. And that's what I often say in my talks. It's this pursuit of the best version of ourselves, and taking steps toward that on a regular basis.
Mhm. Okay, so we for sure need to do like a series of podcast interviews.
Yeah, and I have to interject. One reason why we have to do that is because I actually have a COVID test I need to go take in 15 minutes.
Yes, I know that you were on a time schedule,
Yeah,
so
yeah. And my wife actually came and peeked down the stairs, like, "You're still on," because I need to be there in 15 minutes, which I need to get out of my pajamas.
oh yeah,
This
yeah,
is how I hang out when I'm here at
Hey, I'm
home.
wearing my sweatpants. It's all good.
Yeah, I'm like literally in my pajamas, with a shirt, my vegan strong shirt
Vegan
on.
strong shirt. Yep.
So I will need to wrap up for
Yep.
today, but I think I've just told you, you're the first person I contacted, by the way. You've been reaching out to me to be on the podcast, and with my anxiety issues, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't talk to anybody. And as soon as I decided, you know what, I got a new book, I've got to do podcasts, in a way, I have to force myself to it. I said, the first person I'm going to talk to is Karina Inkster. That's who I want to talk to first. So you're the first person I reached out to, and here we are. And I thank you for having me on. And I know there's still much more we need to talk about protein and about, building muscle and all that. But I think we'll have to probably do a part two. And I'd love to do another part two, either on or before the book comes out in mid-June, if that works for your schedule. If not, no worries. And congratulations on your 10-year anniversary for your business and your big event this weekend. I'm going to spread the word. And
Thank you so much.
and it's so cool to connect with you via video today.
I know, it's been fantastic. Robert, thank you so much. I know that you've got places to go, but I have been following you basically since day one. I've got all your books. Most of them are signed. I super appreciate you coming on the show, doing the forward to our project over here. And yeah, I think this is going to be amazing to just get our listeners thinking about some concepts that haven't really come up on the show before. And we look forward to your book. Congratulations. Super exciting. Cannot wait to get my hands on that. And I would love to have you back. I think that would be fantastic.
Well, let's do it. And, I'm working right now to develop veganbodybuilding.com to have some info about the book on there. We're creating a little book landing page on there that should be up there, maybe even by the time this thing airs. So people can check that out. The book is The Plant-Based Athlete. Super excited, and we'll have some sample content and some free bonuses and all this stuff that comes into, it's part of marketing, that it's all a necessary evil that we have to do when promoting and selling a book. But I thank you so much for having me on today, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you so much, Robert. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Karina.